from the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
Enthusiasm is reaching a fever pitch in the Sunshine State. Turnout is already booming. Nearly 2.5 million people have already cast their votes by mail in the state. That's already come close to surpassing the number from the entire 2016 election. But it's not just Florida. Turnout is shattering records across the country. According to some estimates, voters have so far cast more than 6 times the amount of ballots compared to the same time period 4 years ago. That's led to excessively long lines from North Carolina to Louisiana to Texas, which has nearly 2 million more registered voters than it did in 2016.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, Election 2020. Joining us via Zoom to talk more about it is Nebraska Secretary of State Robert Evnen. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here, and welcome.
Thanks, Kathy. I'm glad to be with you.
Bob, I want to start. If you could sum up this election year in one word, what would that be?
It would have to be challenging. This has been one challenging year, Kathy.
Well, COVID-19 and the presidential candidate's reaction to it, obviously major issues. From where you're sitting, how does this health crisis impact staging an election?
But it has significant impacts, as you can imagine, and as your viewers know. First of all, we're committed to keeping our poll workers and our voters safe at the polls. We got a lot of experience in that at the May primary election, where we were able to collect the personal protective equipment necessary in terms of gloves, masks, face shields for our poll workers, cleaner, hand sanitizers. We socially distanced. These are all things that we put into place at the polls that we've never had to do before. And I'm glad to say that we were able to do so successfully in our state. And of course, the second thing is that we had to gear up in order to accommodate a much larger than normal presence of early balloting. Many more voters voted early in the May primary and are voting early in the general election as well.
Maybe a good time to bring up the role of the Secretary of State in a typical election, Bob.
Kathy, I'd summarize it this way. The role of the Secretary of State in Nebraska, the Secretary of State is the chief elections officer in the state, and it's the role of the Secretary of State to make sure that our elections are conducted in a safe and secure manner statewide. We work with our county election officials across the state. We provide them with support, and we are looking statewide to assure that our elections are safe, secure, and have integrity.
Okay. How do the state and national constitutions establish election procedure?
Well, the national constitution really leaves most of it up to the states. Under the U.S. Constitution, the voting age is set. Who is eligible to vote is set. And of course, this year we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage in the 19th Amendment. So there are a variety of other provisions, but overall, the rest of voting is left to the states. Now, there are a number of federal laws, statutes that have been passed by Congress and signed by the president. Probably the most notable is the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which was a major step forward in eliminating discrimination in voting in what was the Jim Crow South. And there have been other pieces of federal legislation as well. But overall, voting at this point is left to the states, which I believe is where it ought to be.
Okay. The Electoral College, Bob, how does that work?
Well, the Electoral College, Kathy, is not a place. It is a process. And the Electoral College was established wisely, in my view, by the founders of the country. And under that, the president is actually elected by the Electoral College. Each state has, as votes in the Electoral College, the number of congressional districts plus their 2 senators. So, for example, in Nebraska, we have 3 congressional districts. and we have 2 senators. We have 3 plus 2, which is 5 votes in the Electoral College. Because of the Electoral College arrangement, Nebraska's influence on the selection of a president is a little bit more than just what its population would be or what it would be in a national popular vote. And for states like ours, that's a very important factor, and it's something that our founders considered important.
Okay. Speaking of voters, we have a graphic that we'd like to put up for our viewers. Historic voter turnout. So as we're taking a look at that, Bob, tell us what is significant or important for us to know, especially heading into this election.
Well, there's a lot of interest in this election. That's what you can see with this. Our voter turnout in Nebraska, we're anticipating something on the order of 70% of registered voters will cast their ballot. What is as significant as anything about this and turnout has to do with early voting versus voting at the polls. And we can talk about that. But there is obviously a great deal of interest in this election, and our voter turnout percentages are reflecting that.
Okay, and I want to go to that next graphic, Bob. Let's take a look at that. So, yeah, this is the prefer to vote in 2020.
There's just no question that in terms of early voting versus voting at the polls, what we're seeing is that a higher percentage of Democrats prefer to vote early. A higher percentage of Republicans prefer to vote at the polls. This statistic is really being reflected. It continues to be reflected. And I think that is reflected in our state as well. What's interesting in the larger sense is that normally, in a normal election, about 25% of our voters in Nebraska vote early. We have no excuse early voting. You don't have to have a reason. It's not an absentee ballot. If you'd like to vote early, you send a written request to your election official in your county, and you're permitted to vote early. About 25% of our voters choose to vote early in a typical election. In the May primary, it was more like 75%. It was actually more than 75% of our voters in the May primary chose to vote early, and about 25% went to the polls. This is the reverse of what's normal. Now, in the general election coming up, I think that the number of early voters is going to turn out to be somewhere between that 25% that's normal or typical and the 75% we saw in the primary. So I'm not sure where it's going to fall, but it'll be somewhere between those 2 percentages.
Looking back, Bob, in terms of how this year has shaken out, you yourself, looking at all of this, did you expect that? I mean, what we're seeing shake out here, had you really expected that, or is this coming as somewhat of a surprise to you?
Well, what came as a surprise to me is the pandemic. I don't think any of us saw that coming. And once we had a pandemic really in full force, and think back to May, we didn't really know what we were looking at very well. And there was a lot of concern about it. So in the May primary, we made a decision that we would send a letter to every registered voter in the state and tell them, look, if you would like to vote early, just send this request into your county election official and you can vote early. And a very large percentage of Nebraskans chose to do that. That's what was really the big difference this year. And so that effect is continuing on into the general election. But I think more voters are getting more comfortable with the idea that they can go to the polls and be kept safe, which we did in the May primary. But that's the big, Kathy, the big impact is that so many people chose to vote early.
And registration, Bob, where are we with that? Voter registration this year up, and by how much?
Yeah, voter registration this year is up. Our voter registration is about just shy of 50,000 more registered voters than we had 4 years ago. It's up about 4%. This is typically what we see in a presidential election year, is that we do have an increase in voter registrations in presidential years. So we aren't seeing some enormous increase in voter registrations in our state. What we're seeing is really a more typical increase in voter registrations in this presidential election year, and it is about what we would have anticipated.
Okay, and when it comes to those mail-in ballots, Bob, talk to us a little bit more about how all of that works behind the scenes?
Well, mail-in ballots are, first of all, everybody doesn't get one. In order to get an early ballot, you request it. I'm not in favor of statewide all mail-in balloting. That presents a whole raft of issues and problems that, in my view, are unnecessary and difficult to deal with. Because anybody who wants to vote early can do so. So it begins with the voter sends a letter to, or any kind of written request, to their election official in their county. In turn, the ballot is sent to them. They can take the ballot, mark it in their convenience, put it into an envelope, sign the envelope, attest to it that they are the voter. It does not have to be witnessed in our state at this point, but it does have to be signed. The envelope is signed, not the ballot. Then the envelope is returned to the county election official, and that can be returned by mail or by taking it to a drop box. In the primary, we made sure that every county in the state has a locked drop box outside the election office where the ballot can be taken, or you can carry it into the election office. For that matter, if you wish, you can just walk into the election office and just vote. Yeah. So what I would tell your viewers right now is that it's probably too late to put your ballot in the mail. That is, the Postal Service told us that in order to have early ballots delivered on time, they had to be put in the mail no later than October 27th. We're past that date. So I would encourage your viewers who are voters and want to vote early, don't put it in the mail now. Take it to the election official's office, your county clerk, your county election commissioner, and put it in one of those locked drop boxes.
Okay, and I do want to talk about those people who are opting to go to the polls. They're going to go the day of. Bob, because there is concern about safety and so forth, and you've done a nice job of talking about protocol that's being put into place, but what can people honestly expect from the time they park their cars, walking up the sidewalk to their respective polling place? Just literally walk us through that process so that we all have in our minds what we can expect that day.
Sure. Well, you will, as you approach the polling place, you'll be socially distanced. That is, just as a checkout at your supermarket, you're going to be asked to put 6 feet between you and the person in front of you and then the person behind you. When you get to the table where you have poll workers, once again, you'll be distanced. That is, the tables will be doubled up, so you'll be a little further away from the poll worker in order to maintain social distancing that way. As you enter the polling place, if you don't have a mask, you will be offered one. That is, every polling place will have masks available to voters for voters who arrive at the polling place without a mask. Most of the voters in the primary the overwhelming majority of voters came with their own masks. When you get to the table, you will give your name and address to the poll worker. This is just as it's normally done. The poll worker will check to make sure that your name is shown in the poll book. If your name is shown in the poll book, then you'll be issued a ballot that will be initialed at the bottom by two poll judges. This, again, is standard. There's nothing new about that. You'll be given your ballot, and you'll be given a sleeve. So the ballot, you take the ballot to a ballot booth, you mark your ballot, put the ballot in the sleeve with those two initials showing in a slot at the bottom of the sleeve. You take it back over to the polling tables, show that to a polling official, and that you have a ballot and that it has the two initials in it. And then you will empty it yourself into the locked ballot box. And there you go. All of our voters at the polls will be issued pens. We're marking our ballots with black pens now. And those pens will be given to the voter. That is, we're not going to take the pens back and then hand it to the next voter. We'll just let people take the pens with them, as we did in the primary. So the one thing that I would like to point out about this description that I just gave you, Kathy, is this. When you go to the polling place, your ballot is under control at all times. That is, you're handed the ballot by a poll worker. You take the ballot to the ballot booth. You mark the ballot, put it in the sleeve. You take it over to the box and empty it into the box. And the reason that I'm pointing out this is because while your ballot is under your control at all times in the polling booth, when you put your ballot in the mail, which is, I'm encouraging people not to do it, but let me put it a different way. When the election official puts the ballot in the mail to you, at that point in the process, we lose control of that ballot. And that is why I have concerns that I think we ought to focus on very soon in terms of assuring that early balloting can be secured. Our early balloting is secured right now. I'm very satisfied with the security that we have, but I want to focus on it and improve it.
Okay. I want to go back with a couple of follow-up questions here. Protocol, lots of places have guidelines and suggestions in place. What sometimes is lacking is the enforcement piece. So who there at the polling place is going to be kind of the bad guy, right? And letting people or reminding people to be 6 feet apart, or you do need to wear a mask, that kind of thing. Who are we looking to in the polling place for that?
We had people in the polling places in the primary who were helpful in keeping people organized. I will tell you, we didn't have to be heavy-handed with anybody. People were very cooperative. Nebraskans are responsible people, and people were very cooperative throughout that process. So, but we will have people in the polling places who will help remind voters to stay socially distanced. And the whole arrangement is one where it just flows pretty naturally.
Okay. Talk specifically, Bob, to those people who are going to be voting for the first time in this election. What would you say to them? This kind of wild year, right? So how would you talk to those folks?
Well, we often talk of voting as a responsibility and as a duty. But voting is a pleasure, isn't it? Really, voting is a pleasure. It is a great right that we possess as individuals in this representative democracy. Our representative democracy was a breakthrough in terms of political philosophy at the formation of our country in the late 18th century. And what was that breakthrough? The breakthrough was we don't get our rights from a monarch. We don't get our rights from a dictator. We don't get our rights from the king. Where do our rights come from? Where our formational document tells us that we get our rights from our Creator, from the Almighty, and they belong to us individually. So how do we govern ourselves? We govern ourselves by electing people from among us to serve in governance for a period of time. Without elections that are fair and secure, without an informed and responsible electorate, our representative democracy cannot go on. It cannot flourish, because if you have elections that are corrupt, if you have elections people don't have confidence in, then they won't have confidence in the people who they elect, and they won't have confidence in the laws that those people pass and enforce. It's this bedrock to a representative democracy. So for people who are voting for the first time, it's a duty, it's a great privilege, and it's a pleasure to be able to do it. And you'll experience that when you cast your ballot.
Let's think of a couple of potential obstacles for folks and help them overcome those obstacles. All right, so I'm going to what I believe is my polling place, but it turns out not to be my polling place, Bob. So who will tell me that, and how do I get back on track?
The poll workers who are there at that polling place will let you know if this isn't your polling place. They will assist you in locating what your polling place, what is the location of your polling place. There is a lot of communication with voters going on right now about their polling places. So voters are being informed by mail about where their polling places are located. And you can always call your county clerk, your county election commissioner, and whatever poll you show up at, the poll worker will help you figure out where you ought to be.
Okay.
Voters will be given assistance that way.
All right. Now, I'm a voter. I'd like to believe that I'm up to speed on everything that's going to be on the ballot, but I get to that ballot and I'm stumped, or I'm maybe not understanding something the way that I should. What are my options there, Bob?
Well, if you're at the polls, you're going to have to make the call, because there you are. So what I would encourage voters to do is take a look ahead of time. Take a look at the issues. We do have some constitutional amendments and some initiative statutes as well that are on the ballot this year. Take the time to consider the ballot before you walk into the polls and think about those issues. There are many ways of informing yourself about them. First of all, on initiatives, you can go to the Secretary of State's website, and we have, in our elections section, we have information about the initiatives that you'll find on the ballot. And if you use a search engine on the internet, you'll find out all sorts of information about the issues that you're going to be voting on.
Okay. And those workers that we'll find there, volunteers, paid, combination of both? Who are these people who are taking the day for the state?
They're paid volunteers. And we're really fortunate because Nebraskans have really stepped up in this highly unusual year. In the primary, many of our election poll workers are in the high-risk category for COVID. And so we put out an appeal, and we enlisted the assistance of the State Bar Association and the State Public Accountancy Association, also the Nebraska Realtors. And they all helped us and stepped up. And I have to say, we have developed a whole new set of poll workers. There are all these Nebraskans who stepped up to help in their communities as poll workers. And I believe that many of them will be serving again in the general election.
Okay. We've talked mail-in ballots, Bob. When are those going to be tallied?
They will be tallied at the earliest. They can be tallied on Monday, November 2nd. So what happens with these mail-in ballots is when they come into the counties, the envelopes, the signature on the envelope is compared with a signature of a known exemplar. Usually it's an image from the voter registration card. And if the signatures match, then the ballot is okay and it's stored. Then these ballots can begin to be opened on the second Monday before the election. That is essentially a week and a day before the election. Then these ballots the envelopes can begin to be opened. And when they're opened, the envelopes are set aside but stored. They're going to be kept, and the ballots are put in a separate place, and they're both kept securely. They aren't counted. These early ballots may not be counted. As a matter of law, the first day that they can begin to be counted is Monday, November 2nd. And so that at the earliest is when, and the counties that have a large population and many thousands of these ballots will probably start counting them on Monday, November 2nd. But they can't be reported until after the close of the polls on Tuesday.
Okay, so when can folks start to expect to see results? Especially I'm thinking of those first-time folks. Everybody's tuning in, kind of glued to their sets that night, and then the next day. What are you thinking in terms of all of that, Bob?
Well, what you'll see as soon as the polls close at 8 p.m. Central Time, 7 p.m. Mountain Time, on Tuesday, November 3rd, you will begin to see in most counties, you'll begin to see results posted. And the results that are posted will be the results of the early balloting. So the first results that you see in most counties, particularly the more populous counties, will be the results of early voting. And then as the evening goes on and the ballots are tallied from the polling places, then the changes that go on over time will reflect results from the polling places. I expect that by the end of the night or early the next morning, we will have all of the results tallied in our state, and our unofficial results statewide will be posted.
Okay, thank you. So in just the minute or two we have remaining, this is a good opportunity for you as Nebraska Secretary of State to talk to people about the importance of actually getting out there to vote and why that matters so much?
Well, it matters because our representative democracy depends upon our citizens informing themselves about the candidates, informing themselves about the issues, and then exercising the franchise, going out and voting. And we can't have a representative democracy unless our citizens inform themselves and then go out and make their opinions known at the ballot box. So it's crucially important. One of the things that's happening is we have foreign actors who are trying to intrude on our elections, and the way that they're doing it overwhelmingly is they're sowing the seeds of distrust among us. This is a terrible thing. You know, we don't all agree with each other, but we ought to respect each other's opinions, and the fact that we don't agree doesn't make the other guy a bad person. And what we see is that these differences of view are being exploited by foreign actors. Don't let them do it. Don't let them get away with it. If you see information that seems crazy to you, check with your trusted sources to find out. And what I'd say, Kathy, is this, to sum it up: elections count, and your vote matters. So
Bob,
make your voice heard.
Thank you so much. We've got a graphic we want to put up for our viewers. We're talking election 2020 today. Nebraska Secretary of State, sos.nebraska.gov, 402-471-2554. Bob Evnen, thank you so much for being here. Of course, to all of our students who are working so hard behind the scenes, and you viewers who are watching. As we close, a look at scenes from historic Prospect Hill Cemetery in Omaha, as seen through the lens of Joel Ochoa, a junior at UNO. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next week.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at netnebraska.org/consider this. If you'd like to share your comments about this program, call UNO Television at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours, or send an email to cwyatt@unomaha.edu.